Hi, everybody. I'm Ralph Ben-Murgy. Welcome to Not That Kind of Rabbi. As always, I will tell you I'm not a rabbi, but if I was a rabbi, I wouldn't be that kind of rabbi. And I think you know what I mean, or maybe you don't. I am, however, ordained as a spiritual director. What that really involves is basically personal growth and spiritual. I try to help people get a spiritual fitness program together, whatever way that manifests itself. And, we live in an age where religion is out and spiritual but not religious is in. And there's a lot of people in that camp. And I respect it. I also sometimes worry that we've sort of turned it into shopping for God, a bit of a buffet where, I like a little bit of Buddhism every once in a while. A good walk in the park kind of helps. And I'll go home for the high holidays and it'll all be all right. But like wanting to have a six-pack in your stomach, if you don't go to the gym, you don't get the six-pack. It doesn't just happen. And in spiritual work, there's muscles that need to be moved, and they're beautiful muscles to move. So it's not a punishment in any way, but it's a deepening of the experience and giving yourself purpose and meaning in life, because sometimes we just feel alone making decisions, and sometimes they feel random, and it doesn't really work for us. So I do that. If you're interested in that, by the way, just go to my email or my Facebook page for Not That Kind of Rabbi. But the email is at ralphbenmurgy@gmail.com. And we'll do a session, see how you like it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Passover, which is kind of Jewish Christmas, because you have to get together with your family and, your uncle's there and he's always an embarrassment. It's the same thing, but we do it at a different time of the year. So that's one of the things that I find interesting. But the thing I really find interesting about the Passover story is I'm not a literalist in any way, shape, or form when it comes to the stories. I see them as metaphor and often about internal journey. So for instance, the Pharaoh character in the Exodus story, I don't see that as an external historical figure. And it's fine. I see it as the inner tyrant, the one that doesn't let you go, is the critical and harsh judge of who you are and what you do, and hardens your heart to things. We get hurt in life and we start to think about what we want to do about it. And in some cases, we just shrink. It's, in Hebrew, it's called a klippah, the hard shell around your heart. And at certain holidays, one being the Day of Atonement, we knock on our chests to sort of crack that open a bit. And as Leonard Cohen would say, you get to the spirit of people through the broken heart. But the Pharaoh is the tyrant. But there's other beautiful parts of the story. The most interesting thing about it as a freedom holiday is how reluctant the Israelites are to be free. Every chance they get, they just start complaining and fetching, and just everything's like, what are you doing? And the guy doesn't come down from the mountain. Let's start the golden calf. I'm hungry. I want some manna. As a matter of fact, I'd like to eat some meat. Why didn't we just go back to where we came from? At least we knew what our confines were and our structures, and we want order. We don't want freedom. And in this day and age, I find those to be interesting concepts in a world that's very tumultuous for a lot of people, especially in the Western democracies. We find ourselves in a situation where the temptations of fascism are real. The sense of order, the sense of security that we can get. Just tell me that I'm still going to know where I'm going and what I'm doing, and the dominant culture will be the culture of that society. And America certainly has just gone through this, but we all have to be very aware of how many of these kinds of authoritarian regimes are there. So that's our Pharaoh issue, external and internal. And our freedom issue is, what do we really mean when we want to say we want to be free from things? Free from obligation, free from responsibility, because those are the things of citizenship. Free to say and do whatever we want, that's another issue. So those are just some things I wanted to just sort of sprinkle in there as we get near the Passover holiday, the 8 days. And as a lover of matzah, I actually enjoy Passover. It is not a punishment. My mother used to make me, this was embarrassing, my mother used to make me matzah salami sandwiches. So what happens is you bite into it, the matzah crumbles around it, the large cracker crumbles around it, and all you've got left is a disc of salami. This did not go over well at West Prep Public School. That's all I know. It just didn't. I'm going to, before I introduce my guest, I'm going to tell you who my sponsor is. Kaplansky's Mustards. That's the sponsor, the Kaplansky's Deli in Terminal 3. Isn't that fantastic? Zane Kaplansky is a great guy who tells a wonderful story. And he has packets of mustard. You can get the signature variety pack, the pick and mix mustard pack, a Kaplansky's t-shirt, and use the promo code NTKR, not that kind of rabbi. Kaplansky's, the deli that isn't kosher and wants you to quit asking about it. It's a long story. Kaplansky's. All right, it's time to actually say hello to my guest, somebody who I haven't seen in person in decades, literally. And someone who, when they left, I thought, he's just going to do wonderfully. He's just going to be a force. And I was right. He ended up being a seriously good reporter. And having come from that world of journalism, there's a lot of people who are fine. And there's a lot of people who are not so fine. But there's very few who mix courage, intelligence, and insight. And this particular man did all three of those things, working with CBS, working with ABC, working with CBC. But now he's on to an entirely different thing. It's called Trint. And it came from his actual profession, because he was the guy who was really tired of transcribing things, listening to a tape, stopping it, typing, stopping it, typing. And now he's developed a whole technology that takes that audio and turns it into transcript effortlessly for people. And it's a huge hit. So he's the CEO and the co-founder of Trint. But more importantly to me, he's Jeff Koffman. Jeffrey Koffman, welcome to the program. How are you, sir?
Ralph, we have not talked, and it's been literally a quarter century. It is, wow. You and I were both young bucks at the CBC together, and wow, it sort of feels like a fading color photo from the past.
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, when you look through the prism of time, as we get older, and I just finished writing a book about getting older, but when we get older, you start to say to people, about 25 years ago, and the time continuum just stretches. Do you see yourself still through the lens of the kid who grew up in Toronto, the Canadian, who just happens to be in all these different places in the world, including now in London?
Apart from when I try to stand up in the morning, I'm still the kid. My lower back sometimes reminds me that I'm not. There's certain things about growing older. I guess it depends what life hands you, and what you seek, and fate and circumstance bring. But I still kind of think of myself as a wide-eyed kid, and people tease me and they say, "Wow, you have the passion of a kid," and to do what I did, building this startup into a scale-up, this technology company here in London, England. I didn't realize, but you actually need that energy. You need that wide-eyed view of the world, because it's hard, and you have to be an optimist, and you have to remember those Popeye punching bags with sand in the bottom that we had when we were 6 years old. Yeah. That's what the founder of a startup is. But to be honest, it's kind of what being a network correspondent in U.S. television is as too, because you get knocked over a lot, and you got to either find a way to pull yourself back up, or you're defeated. So in a strange way, that resilience, that optimism, is a very strong survival technique that's essential for any of these really hard jobs.
Well, I always saw you as somebody who was willing to pick the right fight.
I don't know. Sometimes I think I was a coward. I think that when I was younger, I was so concerned about being seen as a good kid that I was afraid to pick fights for the right thing. And I think it was only in my 20s, about the time you and I met, when we were both before I went to the CBC National News, when we were both at CBC Toronto, the local news. It was around that time that I started to sort of develop a spine. It took me some time.
Well,
I don't. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think that was about?
The truth is that it was about being comfortable in my skin as a gay man, because I think that I was wearing a mask as a kid, and I came out in the 1980s when AIDS was around the world and ravaging the world and killing people my age and older, friends of mine. And so it was a very strange time. There was we're in the midst of a pandemic where the world is throwing every resource it can to solve it. If you go back literally 40 years, nobody cared. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan famously didn't give a hoot. So you really, the hardest part about being gay in that age was wondering whether you were going to die, whether you were going to live to be 30, and watching other people die, and wondering how people would respond. And so it really, at some point, I had to reconcile with that. And when I did, it was like, well, so what's your problem? And it gave me a huge amount of courage.
Yeah, I remember your leading the charge in the Jewish community about the rights of gay people to equal marriage. Holy Blossom, am I wrong?
Well, I wouldn't want to take, I think it was my role in terms of gay marriage was not really a significant one. I think there were a lot of people who did a lot more. I think, I think that my role, my more significant role was about in journalism, where there were no role models, and where it was really, for me, that was really where it took. I was terrified as a kid. I started at Global News in Toronto, and I really believed if they found out I was gay, I was going to lose my job. And I honestly believed that, and it tore me apart. And I thought, oh my God, I'm on TV. I remember I was a Queen's Park correspondent, the Ontario legislature. I was a political correspondent at this crazy age of like 24 or 25. And I didn't understand why they gave it to me, apart from the fact I had a political science degree, which didn't really qualify me to do that job anyway. But in the end, I did. And I remember being at an AIDS fundraiser, and one of the Ontario cabinet ministers showed up, and I literally hid because I was afraid she would think, oh my God, she'd equate. And I was so ashamed of myself and so mad at myself afterwards that I thought, wait a minute, what are you doing, you idiot? But you're young and you have to make mistakes sometimes and learn from them. And when I look back,
you'd even be terrified of a tell, of a movement of your body, of a way of saying something, of a person you say hello to that will tell people you're gay.
Yeah. I think the funny thing about it, sort of, fast forward, that was probably 1985. So what are we, 36 years later? When I think, holy cow, I did not see this coming. Spending, so many years of my life as a war correspondent with ABC News in Iraq, in the Arab Spring in North Africa, covering Latin America, covering revolutions, and, in Haiti, which were incredibly dangerous. And I think, wow, that was pretty tough stuff. And, I did not sort of think I had the spine to do it. I didn't choose to do it. But it sort of, you go into journalism, and, I always went into journalism because I believed fundamentally that one of the cornerstones of democracy is an informed electorate, and that making people, giving people the opportunity to learn and nudging them to be a little uncomfortable in their assumptions was at the core of what journalism should be doing. And so, I remember, when 9/11 happened, and I was ABC News correspondent in Miami, and they said, we want you to go to Pakistan, where they've just kidnapped this Wall Street Journal reporter named Daniel Pearl. And as I was packing my bag to go to Karachi, was watching ABC World News with Peter Jennings, and he said, and they've just put out a fatwa on any American journalist who sets foot in Pakistan. And I'm thinking, I have a flight in 3 hours, and I'm going there. And I think I literally dropped the clothes I was putting in my suitcase, and thought, wow, this is the real deal. And I got on that flight, and I went there, and it was terrifying. But you learn to compartmentalize your fear, and as I say, put it in a lockbox, slide it under the bed in your hotel, and just focus, because at some point you have to be dedicated to it, and you can't be blurred by fear. You can't have your judgment and your vision obscured by it, and so you do learn how to deal with that.
Yeah,
What's that?
Daniel Pearl was decapitated
He was decapitated
for being a Jew as well, not just as an American, but as a Jew.
for
And
being Jewish, and there I was as a
right,
Jewish Canadian, but an American journalist in there. So yeah, I mean, I had like a and gay too. So like I was a threefer, and I mean, I spent 5 weeks there living, and we were in Karachi, and ABC News was terrified of letting us. No, we were in Islamabad, the capital, which was very far from Karachi. And, there we were saying, here's what's going on. It was actually, it's like being in Vancouver and talking about what's going on in Ottawa. And we said, either we go back to London and do it from London, or we go to Islamabad. Or sorry, pardon me, Karachi. I'm getting my cities confused again. We go to Karachi and report from where it actually happened. And so they reluctantly let us do that. And I think we spent 3 or 4 weeks there while the hunt went on and for him. And we just had to be incredibly careful where we went. And the odd thing was that people there were really friendly. I mean, they weren't menacing. I mean, they're wonderful people, as you would expect. But it's just a few people.
That's the thing with news, right? The overrepresentation of the extremes is the norm. So, when people say the world is screwed up, everything is screwed up, and then you think, no, there's a few billion people walking their kids to school right now and giving them a kiss and saying, love you, have a good day. It's not one thing, but the one thing can redefine the realities in people's heads.
It's a good observation. You should go into spiritual leadership. No, it is a funny thing because I want to talk a little bit more about sort of that in relation to war, but it reminds me of sort of I've covered earthquakes and you always take the shot of the street where the houses are shattered. What you don't see in that shot is that a block away everything is fine. And that is just the nature of news. Because I mean, I always tried in my earthquake stories to put that in perspective, but candidly, a lot of it never made it in the final story because the pictures of collapsed buildings are so dramatic and they're real. It's not like you're faking it, but what you don't get is that helicopter view that this is one corner. Now, sometimes in earthquakes, it's much broader. But the point being that yes, it's only what the camera shows. But to go back to war zones and what you just said, I think the most surprising thing about being a war correspondent that sort of gradually seeped into me is that war is not the bang bang and the bomb, the aftermath of bombs. Most of it is actually complete normalcy, punctuated by these moments of horror and terror. And so that when you're actually living in Baghdad during the Iraq War or on a forward operating base with the U.S. Army, it's just normal. It's all fine until it's not. And people are going out and they're buying bread. They're I think there's certain circumstances when in war when you have these kind of insurrections. I think in Lebanon this happened for quite a long time. I never covered the Lebanese Civil War, where you just couldn't go out because there were snipers all the time. But in my pretty extensive experience, there is this kind of strange level of normalcy. Children go out, they get ice cream in the middle of a war zone because they're children and because their parents want to have as much normalcy as they can. And then you have these moments of a bomb going off or going to the aftermath of a bomb and seeing sheer, just gut-wrenching horror. So
Chris Hedges has written well about being a war correspondent in Bosnia-Herzegovina, for instance, and has written books about that war gives us meaning. I wonder, in having covered, and you've been to places where there is societal breakdown, there is carnage, there is lawlessness, failed states. What has that done to your faith in people? Either way.
I think there are two answers to that. On one level, I am in awe of the resilience of the human spirit. I think that people live in, and this isn't just in war. In extreme poverty. I've spent a lot of time in Haiti. And Cité Soleil in Haiti. There's no war going on, but it is the essence of hell on earth. It is 1.5 million, give or take, people living in basically a a slum that is beyond despair. It's just, you know, open sewage, living in shanties made of nothing. And but you take that and then add a war to it in Haiti, you know, civil war in Haiti, or the horrors of Iraq, covering Libya, Tunisia, Egypt. I think that the thing that informs me from war is that people are incredibly resilient. And so, you know, in the midst of this pandemic around coronavirus, it's devastating, it's hurting people, it's killing people. But I do actually believe that the optimist in me has seen the world tested, and there will be tragically, you know, serious casualties and death because of coronavirus, and some of it inexcusably unnecessary because of the neglect of the, you know, in the UK government, the American government, the Brazilian government, etc. But the fact is, we will. I have no doubt we will figure this out, and we will get through it at some cost. Not to dismiss it. So I do see the resilience of the human spirit. And, you know, before I talk to you about the other side, it reminds me, you know, I mean, one of the things that I say about my experience is that our worst day is better than a lot of people's best day. So don't lose, you know, don't forget that, you know, even, you know, sitting here in London or you know, where you are in, you know, outside of Toronto, you know, there are a lot of people going through real hardship, and, you know, their jobs are gone, or, you know, their businesses are upside down. And I have huge amounts of empathy. But when you've seen what I've seen in wars and in poverty, those people would love to have our problems. I mean, you know, but we have to live our lives, and we have to navigate our own paths. I do remember once coming back from Iraq, and I was on assignment, and I don't remember what I was doing, but I was in Philadelphia airport on a very rainy day, and everybody who travels has had this experience where all the flights are late. And you're sitting literally on the floor because there are no seats left in the lounges. And it's like, oh my God, my flight's 4 hours late. What am I going to do? And I just don't want to be here, but I've got to get to wherever I was going. And I remember, yeah, I'd been back from Iraq, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, but it stays with you, let me tell you. And I remember this old man sitting across from me, you know, at the gate, waiting for the plane to be boarded, which wasn't happening. And he said to his wife, "This is the worst day of my life." And I heard myself say, "Sir, I guess you've had a pretty good life then." And he turned beet red. And I was like, I couldn't, but I just thought, what are you talking about? You know, I mean, okay, it's a pain in the butt that your flight's 4 hours late. I hate it too. But really, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. There's a choice. I find myself to digress a moment, in airports, really being able to switch on the Zen part of who I am.
You have to, yeah. Right? That is the key to being a good traveler. But I want to answer the flip side of your question.
Yeah.
Which is, what about, you know, the evil side? And I think that our ability, I have seen it, and our ability as human beings to switch off morality, to rationalize evil, is a really, you know, listen, history is full of it. And, you know, I don't need to give you examples, but it is a very real component of you know, being human. And it is, I think we all have it in us, but, you know, we hope that our better angels are going to suppress it, and that, you know, the goodness of our souls and just a fundamental moral compass will keep us away from that. And I think most of us generally do, certainly from extreme evil. But I wouldn't, you know, I don't think you can underestimate, and we, you know, history shows us, good people can be persuaded and pushed to do evil things. And it is, it doesn't, you never want to justify what they've done, but I think it's way too complex to say, oh my gosh, I wouldn't have done that. I mean, I think it's a really, really complicated thing to witness evil and to wonder what exactly allows you to do this.
But you've spoken to people who have just finished doing something that we could say is evil, I'm sure, mm-hmm. Right? In that moment after, Would you have known that they were capable of doing this? Did they just seem completely normal? Did you know, how do I judge the eyes I'm looking into here? I mean,
I once challenged a guerrilla leader in Haiti during the civil war there in a press conference, and I think I was probably pretty. It was pretty bad judgment on my part. He had killed quite a lot of people, and I think I asked him how many people have you killed during the civil war, and he got really pissed off,
right.
and my team said, I think we got to get you out of here because he was
Why
really.
did you do it?
Because I felt he should be held accountable, and I thought that I wanted to use, I was recording, and it was a press conference, and he was talking about himself, and I just said, so how many people have you actually killed during, in getting to this point? And I remember my team was like, I'm not sure that was the smartest question. It might not have been, but at the same time, I did feel like he should be challenged and held accountable, and the way he dodged the answer kind of spoke about who he is. But that being said, I think the answer is what you would expect. In most cases, no, they're just normal people who have done. I think this. I talked earlier about compartmentalizing fear.
Yeah.
This compartmentalizing is part of the human condition. We can compartmentalize, and it's a good thing. Sorrow, grief. You have to move on in life. At some point, you've got to just put those things in a place in your.
Yeah, but I'm a fan as well of like when people talk to me about why would I even bother with anything in religion. One of the things I point to is ritual. That there are rituals that really help a person to incorporate into themselves, to integrate into themselves the good and the bad. The passage is into adulthood, the marriage ritual, the Shiva dying ritual in Jewish tradition. Every culture has its own.
I agree. You're right. They do help, and there's a reason. There's a social reason.
Right. So it's not. I don't see that as much as compartmentalizing my grief, for instance, but it's finding a place to put it, and a structure within it should work. So 7 days with everybody, a month a headstone, 11 months you rise up and it's over. That helps a person go, there is a timeline and a light at the end of this tunnel, as opposed to.
Yeah, we can debate the term. I accept that in that context. But I think that when I use the word compartmentalize, I think that we can almost disconnect the wires to that part of our soul, and certainly for evil. But I think also for pain, I think, that we've endured and come through. I think that, and sometimes it's a coping mechanism. But I do think that, when you talk about evil, I think that there is this switch that exists that people sometimes pull, and it allows them to do terrible things. And it may be cheating their partner out of money. It may be stealing. It may be something, more physically violent.
Yeah. So the things you've seen, you can't unsee. Where do you put them in you?
That's a really interesting question. So do you remember those Kodachrome slides we had as kids on a carousel, the round carousels? I mean, a lot of listeners who are younger wouldn't know, but before there was digital photography, the best pictures were color slides that you would show on a projector, and they had beautiful deep colors. What's that?
Carousel.
And you'd put them in a carousel, and you'd show people your trip. What it was you were where you'd been. For me, I have this carousel of horror that I've witnessed over the years that sits somewhere in the recesses of my brain. And it is, as I'm speaking, I'm starting to see the images. I can see the bloated bodies in Tripoli when they attacked anybody who was black and put spears through them, and they just left them to bake in the sun. And it was just, I can see people with limbs missing and bodies, and a soldier who died in front of me, and all of that. I think and what happens as I talk about it is I can feel my throat constricting. There's kind of a physiological response because it's really powerful stuff. What's interesting for me about that is that I don't have nightmares, and I don't think about those images unless someone like you asks me about those images. And then they flood in, and there they are. I mean, some of those images are 20 years old, and they're still, that carousel, they're still in living color in my brain. But for reasons that I don't know that I can explain, I don't wake up in cold sweats in the middle of the night remembering those things. I don't have nightmares about them, but they're there. And I guess that's when I talk about compartmentalizing. Somehow, listen, I think if you are an ambulance driver, an ambulance attendant, a paramedic, you see a lot of bad things. If you're a fireman, you see a lot of bad things. A trauma surgeon. I think war is much more extreme in the kind of the randomness and cruelty of it. But I think that people in all those professions have to deal with something like that, and somehow I have a friend here in London, a Canadian who's a paramedic, and I asked him about it. I said, what do you do with all those images? Because he picks people, dead bodies up from under trucks and stuff, and he said, I just don't think about them. I put them away. And I, what else would you want them to do? I think if you can't do that, you couldn't continue doing that job.
Yeah, as long as we can know they're there, because we have wounds, we have to tend to the wound, and if we just hope the wound just goes away, sometimes it will take us. I
don't know if it's a wound. I think it's
well, it's hard on the heart to watch.
Yeah, for sure.
Carnage of life, even
for sure.
If you're a witness.
I watched a 21-year-old American soldier who had who had shrapnel in his brain die on the operating table in front of me, and I will never forget that. I mean, it was there was actually, I did a lot of work covering in Iraq on battlefield medicine, and I at one point had to get a huge amount of permission from the U.S. Army. Did a piece on frontline medicine and trauma. It was really fascinating, and we were in Balad, the U.S. Army base north of Baghdad, for some time, and following it was very much like MASH, the show that you and I watched in the 70s, that took the mobile army surgical hospital in Korea with Alan Alda, the sitcom that sort of shaped our childhood. This was kind of a modern version of that. It was a series of tents, but with equipment that was really, really cutting edge. And we were essentially, the agreement was we were shooting what was going on there. We were doing a documentary for ABC News Nightline, and there was what they basically did was they collected all the people who needed to go to Ramstein, the American military hospital in Germany, and they waited until there was a severe trauma that had to be transported immediately. And there was I think it's a C-17, the big, huge transport jet. And essentially, when that trauma came in, they would stabilize the soldier, and then they would say, okay, all the people who have been waiting, who are stable, who have smaller injuries, we're heading out in 3 hours as soon as this guy's out of OR. And so this happened, and it was we went a couple of days without sleeping. And I remember the helicopter came in at night, and they said, we have a guy who's just had his intestines ripped apart by shrapnel. He's a young soldier. He's going to go into OR in the moment. If he comes out alive, we're gonna take off. We weren't in the OR for that part. It was really touch and go. And we get on the C-17 on this huge transport plane. And it was like a medieval tableau. They literally had gurneys strapped to the floor where, it's a cargo plane, and where the rollers are, they had literally strapped gurneys. And there maybe were, I don't know, 50 or more soldiers with injuries. Some of them fairly minor, but needed to be taken out. And then this one guy who was severely injured. And he was using brand new technology, which was a mobile intensive care unit, which had only been invented in around 2000. It didn't exist in the Gulf War in the early 90s. And I remember saying to the surgeon, is this guy going to survive? He said, absolutely. We're pumping antibiotics into him. His stomach is resected, but his bowels resected, but that can be fixed. I have absolute confidence, when we get him to Ramstein, we can put him back together. And I said, would he have survived previous wars? He said, World War II, not a chance. Korea, not a chance. Vietnam, I doubt it. Gulf War, maybe. Now, yes. And I remember looking around on that plane, and there was a young soldier. The agreement was you didn't shoot faces without permission, and if they weren't conscious, you didn't shoot the face at all. And of course, you honor that. And there was a 19-year-old soldier who had lost his foot to a landmine or a bomb or something. And I went up to him and I said, hey, here's who we are. And normally you don't say this as a journalist, but I began by saying, please feel free to say no. I mean, normally you do not say that, but in this circumstance, I did. And I said, I'm with ABC News and we're shooting this documentary on battlefield medicine but if you don't want to be part of it, it's okay. And I must have said it 2 or 3 times because I really didn't want to pressure the guy. And I remember him saying to me, my heart just cracked. He said, sir, I'm having a really rough time getting my head around the fact I don't have a right foot. Is it okay if I pass? And, I still tear up when I think about it. It's like, oh my God, it's absolutely okay. It's like,
and
yes.
You wouldn't have given him the out if you hadn't sensed that you weren't just walking up to somebody, that there was already a grievous loss on his part.
Yeah, I mean, normally you don't. When you go up to somebody, as a reporter, generally you don't begin a sentence by saying it's okay if you say no. I mean, if they say no, you respect it, but it's not. And I remember sitting down. We hadn't slept. I was exhausted, and all of the American soldiers wore these black bracelets for comrades who died, and with the name, say Corporal so and so, and it was and they all had them because there'd been quite a lot of deaths, and some of them had 2 or 3, and it was just a way to memorialize one of their unit buddies. And I suddenly was overcome with emotion, and I went behind one of the cargo containers and just sat down and just bawled my eyes out. And I just felt like, oh my God, this is the price of, these are the Americans. I mean, think of the Iraqis who don't even have access to this medical care. And, this is what war does. And it was just such a, it was just so much to process, all of it, to see it. And then you think, this is modern medicine. Imagine what war was like, 50, 100 years ago.
Oh my God, well, infection alone killed most people. But, I just flashed back on the airport where you're waiting 4 hours and the guy says, this is the worst day of my life.
Exactly.
Nuts.
Really?
What are you thinking? Hey, let me ask you something. Where does your Jewishness come into your life? I think I didn't grow up in a very Jewish environment in Toronto, and so for me, we went to synagogue, but it was more. It was not a deeply religious experience for me. It was more of a cultural experience, and my mother's family were all German Jews who'd come to the U.S. and Canada in the mid sort of 1870s, 1880s. So we're extremely assimilated. Right. So I actually had a Christmas tree as a kid, as well as a menorah. But we never had Christmas with Christ. It was just presents, and it was a really sort of schizophrenic sense of place. And so for me, I think it took me time to kind of understand what the cultural heritage of Judaism is, what the spiritual heritage is. And so for me, it's never been a deeply religious journey. I think what it is a place of pride of the culture, the history, the values, and I think that does inform me. And I think, I think in a certain way, my parents didn't like it when I said this. I remember they're sadly long gone, but I remember that coming to terms with being Jewish for me was a bit like coming to terms with being gay, because I grew up as an outsider in the Jewish community and as an outsider in the more in the Gentile world, and so
it was, finding that place was also a journey.
You went to Upper Canada College too, right? Which is not
I
exactly a bastion of Yiddishkeit.
we used to call it Lonsdale Heights Collegiate, just
On
people who
still,
didn't know um, I did, I mean, I wasn't the only Jewish kid. And the reality is, my mother's father went. He was head boy in 1908. I mean, so it was never a religious school, but it's a stuffy,
an old boys'
prep
nest.
school. It's an old boys' school. Listen, I got a great education. I think it forever scarred me when it came to sort of competitive sports and stuff. It was just so much focused on winning in the most insidious ways, and I think it was really bad about that. I think
Yeah,
things are better now, but it was all about it wasn't about how you played the game. It was about winning. I mean, they claimed it was about how
yeah.
you played the game, but
Oh,
it was I have had zero interest in spectator sports in my entire life, and I'm sure that sort of competitive sports. I now, at this stage in my life, I do really serious long distance road cycling, but I don't go. I've been in some competitive sportives. I'm no interest in them. I just like to do it. I compete against myself.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm really happy doing that. And I actually am probably in better shape now than apart from some periods of my life than I've ever been, because I just continue to, particularly in lockdown, I just continue to work out at home and cycle. And you said that six packs are partly are about how much you work out. They're actually about diet,
Really.
what you eat. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's probably, they'll tell you it's 2/3 of what you eat and 1/3 how much exercise you do.
So, would you say, what's your relationship to spirituality then?
I think that I believe in a fundamental value of goodness, and I think it's maybe a bit cute to say that God and good are almost the same word, but I do actually believe that, and I think that we know internally, and we can, and the people we respect know, help us stay on course. What is the right thing to do? What is the good thing to do? And I fundamentally think that spirituality is about finding that route to being a good person, a good citizen, doing good things, and exhibiting those behaviors. And I think that spirituality plays into community, and it plays into how we process behaviors we see, and trying to assume good intentions, trying to check our own bad sort of thing, the behaviors that ultimately are destructive. I remember saying to people who wanted to work for my startup Trint, when in the early days, when they said what are the values, before we'd come up with things like value statements, and I remember just in the middle of an interview with some prospective employee, I said, well, I guess it's the 3 Bs: no bullshit, no bitching, no backstabbing. Um, and I think
Negative
that,
commandments.
what's that?
Those are the negative commandments. Don't kill.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess they are, but I think that I think spirituality is. I don't know if I'm a deeply spiritual person, but I believe I have really a strong sense of morality and values, and I really really passionately believe in challenging ourselves to to do good things, and to do good things that make in small ways push the world to aspire to better things. And I think that was always what motivated my journalism.
Yeah, but
And
as a CEO, I also have noticed, and looking and reading certain things that you've been doing with Trent, um, it sounds to me very much like you care deeply about the employee and the employee experience. That you're not just you over here, you my office. You're going, okay, mental health,
can we do a
loneliness.
separate podcast on managing millennials, please?
Yeah.
Um, they're not the same as you and me, just for the record.
Yeah.
I do care. I mean, I think that I worked for a lot of really bad bosses, and I've said to the team, my aspiration is to be the boss I wish I had but never had. And candidly, the company's approaching 100 people. It's really hard, particularly in lockdown, where we've hired more than 60 people since lockdown, and so I haven't met more than almost 2/3 of my team in face to face. It is really hard to create culture and values in a company remotely. We've worked really strongly to do it, and I think with some success. But the inability to read people, to just sort of say, "Hey, what's on your mind? You look upset," is really difficult with with Zoom calls and Slack and email and I think it really handicaps you. But I do believe in values. I mean, I think I really believe. I think it's really fun as a boss to find ways to position employees to achieve and excel and surprise themselves, and I think it's incredibly rewarding. And I say to them, and I believe this about I think this is the title of my autobiography that I'm not sure I'll ever write, but it's about the journey, not the destination.
Right. Indeed. That's the thing is, if it's about the destination, then the actions are transactional. What's in it for me? How am I going to get there? Are you the utility of a person? Martin Buber's book, I and Thou. There's I and it relationships. We've both been to the party where people look over our shoulder to see if somebody with more influence could be perhaps corralled into a conversation or and yet the I and Thou is seeing the sacred part of yourself and the sacred part of the person you're talking to. But it's a thou relationship, a respectful one. And we live in a commodity-driven economy and society, which means people are commodities, people are units. Extractive capitalism takes things out of people and out of resources, right?
Ralph, what I think is really, in this tragic pandemic, I think one of the things that I really observe is that people like me, who lived really fast lives, spending a lot of time traveling, a lot of time rushing from meeting to meeting, you can find yourself being busy in life, and then suddenly find that the decades go by. And I remember meeting these New York socialites who just went to parties 5-6 nights a week, and had lunches, and it was like, and I remember saying, "Really, do you enjoy it?" And I remember this woman saying to me, "I would be so bored if I didn't have this. I'm sitting at home. This is my lifeblood." And I remember thinking, "Wow, that's a dependency." And
but the adrenaline junkies in reporting, right?
That's exactly my point. That I think a lot of us live that life in different ways, and I think what's happened with this lockdown is it's just forced us all to slow down and stop, and sort of in a certain way get off the hamster wheel of life. And I wonder whether it will have a residual effect. I think to a certain degree in business and travel it will, because I think we've now been forced to online, and we've discovered that certain things now through technology don't require that we travel to Tokyo for a 1-hour lunch meeting. We can probably do it on a video call. I think that we have created a society, and if you look at the consumer society, shopping malls, fast fashion, where everything's about gratification. And I think that what's happened with lockdown and isolation is that suddenly we've had to find sustenance elsewhere. And
also the inequities of how we're living, the way we treat our elders, the way we treat each other, the lack of social safety net for people, those all are being laid bare in our societies, and the inequities in what people make at the top and what everybody else makes have become so extreme and obscene that you wonder what effect will be on that, because even in the middle of the pandemic, we had the American, what I like to call the slow motion American Civil War, was still in full bloom. You had, fighting on the streets. There's a lot going on that we can just say, oh, it's no big deal, but there are profound shifts that could happen, and climate change itself, climate destruction, will probably be the thing that pushes us over those edges into climate refugees, into more pandemics, into all kinds of.
I think you're probably right, but I actually think that we're going through that now in a not necessarily an apocalyptic, but maybe a way with the internet and sort of the way we communicate. And I think what you talk about, the slow motion American Civil War, was fueled by social media and by the ability of people to sort of through the anonymity, sitting in their pajamas at home, firing off missives on Twitter and other places without any accountability, responsibility, and creating lies because they either believed them, they wanted people to believe them, or just because they got their jollies. And I think what's for me, it's really fascinating to watch Joe Biden. I mean, I think Joe Biden, had he been successful as president in his previous runs, might have been an okay president, but I think Biden is actually positioned now to potentially be a really significant, a really important president in American history, because he has already calmed down the discourse, and he's just passed this massive aid package, which will bring in for the first time a child tax credit to the U.S., which is as significant as the kind of things that were done by FDR, and I think it is really fascinating to see where that part of the American journey goes, because there's so many open sores now in that country. But you said at the beginning that populism and fascism have reared themselves again. I think enabled by social media. I think we've got to figure out how not to suppress free speech, but to hold people accountable in the cesspit of social media.
A simple tool of you have to identify yourself as who you are would solve a fair amount of problems, I think.
Easier said than done. I mean, I completely agree with you. If you could do it, it's a great idea. I'm not sure it's given the way social media has evolved, whether you can put that genie back in the bottle. But if you can come up with a way to do that, Ralph, you'll save the planet.
Mr. Koffman, I'm going to say goodbye. It has been absolutely wonderful to talk to you. It's been so long since I've seen you, but it's good to see you in such fine form. And my heart goes to you for all the things that you've witnessed for all of us throughout your career. I always used to say to people, the thing about journalism is you're the one who keeps your eyes open when everybody else has closed them. And you're one of those. So I've always loved that about what you've done with your work.
I even though I wince at so many of the horror, I've also seen an awful lot of wonderful things in the world. And we, as usual, look at you. You're a typical journalist. You've had me talk about all the negative stuff, but you haven't. I covered Latin America for 10 years. It was one of the great joys of my life. I mean, I covered stories of hardship and poverty and earthquakes and civil wars, but I also covered a lot of really fantastic people doing extraordinary things. And so I think I've been really lucky. Wow. It has. When I think about all those opportunities, all the places I've seen, the people I've met, the challenges. And the creative outlet that I've been given, by working for CBC, CBS, ABC, in that bucket list of life, I feel really incredibly grateful to have had these opportunities.
Tell people where they can find out more about Trint.
Trint.com. Trint's a word that I invented for transcription and interview. So it's I think it's either a portmanteau or a neologism, where you compress two words to create a new word.
I'm thinking portmanteau, but I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, well, it is. It's yes, and so yeah, Trint.com. We take conversations like this and turn them into something you can create a story out of. And podcasts like this are built with Trint.
Beautiful, my friend. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
It's great to connect, Ralph. What a surprise. Yeah. I think it's more than 25 years.
Something like that. It's been enough. We've had a life, and now we're
Thanks for reaching out. Thanks. This is not, I do a lot of podcasts. They're mostly about my journey as an entrepreneur. This is the first time I've gone to some of these areas. So it's actually really, really, really interesting to be asked, taken off my normal message track into areas where I don't actually normally talk publicly.
Well, that's what journalists are supposed to be for, to take you off your usual message track.
Yeah, you did it, Ralph.
Thanks, Jeff. Take care of yourself, okay?
Thanks.
Thanks again to Kaplansky's Deli. It makes Jeff Koffman laugh. But it's a mustard, for God's sake, and it's a good one. And you can be at Terminal 3 when Jeff arrives in Toronto the next time. He can go to Kaplansky's Deli and say, I know who you are. This is so cool. They make a great smoked meat sandwich. Look, I really do like their mustards. I have them in a home. And I have a T-shirt. They have a great T-shirt called Kicking It Old School. That's a good one. I like that one. They've got some great stuff on their website. You can go and check them out at kaplansky'sdeli.com and say NTKR in the promo code, and you'll get a discount. They'll give you some money off the thing with the meat. And you don't eat meat. Sorry, that's from my big fat Greek wedding. That's it for me. I'm Ralph Benberger. You take care of each other. Check out the Facebook page for Not That Kind of Rabbi. And we're going Patreon finally. So hopefully you can help support this podcast and make sure that I get to talk to wonderful people like Mr. Koffman every once in a while. Take care. Bye-bye.
This podcast has been produced by TMDS and accelerated by Roam Phone. Roam Phone brings you the most reliable virtual phone service to run your business and protect your home number from unwanted calls. Visit roamphone.ca to get started.